In this lecture, let's discuss about WAR structure. WAR stands for Web Archive. Java community process standardize the way you deploy a web application onto a web server. You have to combine all your project artifacts into a single zip file with an extension of .war and hand it over to the web server. The web server takes the WAR file that you gave and then makes it ready for production. And this whole process is called as deployment. While you can create the WAR file manually, most of the times it is the responsibility of the IDE that you are using, such as Eclipse, which gives you an option to simply run your project on a web server. And when you select that option, Eclipse automatically converts all your project files into a WAR file, copies that into an appropriate folder of Apache Tomcat. In its exploded format, a WAR file consists of a folder called webinf, which is very important. The webinf folder consists of a file called web.xml, which is also known as deployment descriptor. From Servlet version 2.5 onwards, using a web.xml has become optional. And starting from Servlet version 3.0, many of the features of the web.xml can be declared via annotations. Most common use of the web.xml is to define servlets and their mappings. Apart from that, you can also have information about listeners, filters, session timeout, and few security constraints. Alongside web.xml, there are typically two more folders over here. One is called classes, which consist of the class files representing servlets, filters, listeners, entity classes, DAO classes. Anything that you have coded will be part of the classes folder. The other one is the lib folder. The lib, as the name suggests, is a library. It consists of all the additional jars and zip files that your project might be referring to. If you're using XML files or property files, they all go to the classes folder. The rest of the files which are accessible to the browsers are kept under the root of your project directly, such as HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, or images, etc. You can also keep the JSP files inside the root of your applications. However, we don't want the end user to access the JSPs directly, especially when you're using an architecture called Model View Controller, which we will discuss in the subsequent lectures. In such cases, we keep the JSP files inside the webinf folder because webinf is a folder which is only meant for the server and not for the client, such as browsers. So if you keep a JSP file inside the webinf folder, the browsers can't make a request to that particular JSP file. So typically the way is that you make a request to a servlet, which is a Java program, and that servlet does some work and then dispatches the control to a JSP, and all these things are happening in the server side, and there is no problem in accessing the webinf folder. And then the content of the JSP will be processed on the server side, and an HTML response will be given back to the client. So this is the structure of WAR or web archive file. Even though most of the time we don't come across with this particular file, once your project is ready, this is the way you deploy an application to a server. In the next lecture, let's see how to set up Apache Tomcat on our Eclipse.